Hey everyone, welcome into Patterns Tell Stories. I'm your host, Klaus, and today we're going to be talking about Native American burial mounds, Stargate, and this dude, Mike Turner, who is pulling some bullshit this week. Let's start off with him, but first I'm going to welcome my co-host, Garrett. How's it going, man?
Really good, man. I'm glad to be here. How are you doing?
Good. Just got back from vacation and rested up. So let's just jump into it. So this past week, this dude, Mike Turner, who's a representative in the House from Ohio, conveniently the district that Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where that's located, he's kind of caused some problems when it comes to the UAP transparency effort. He made comments to, I guess, James Comer, who is the Republican chair of the House Oversight Committee, essentially telling him the House Oversight Committee is the one who held the recent hearing on UFOs with David Rush, Ryan Graves, and Dave Fravor. So they were kind of really pushing the bill on this one and getting actual people to come in and testify about non-human intelligence, which is the main thing we all want to hear about and learn about. So, obviously that was really exciting. A lot of people are taking what I'm about to read you pretty hard in terms of, thinking it's a disaster for momentum going forward. But there's this guy, Mike Disclosure, on Twitter. He's actually also a commentator on Disclosure Tonight with Thomas Fessler. I've actually watched him on there a bunch of times. He's a really smart guy and has a really measured take on things. I respect his opinion, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. But he, I guess, reports that Rep. Mike Turner from Ohio, who is the chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, has convinced Rep. James Comer, who is the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, that any more UAP hearings by the HOC would cause serious harm to the reputation of the Department of Defense in the eyes of the public and should be avoided for the foreseeable future. As a result of this decision, there will be no further hearings on this topic by the House Oversight Committee. That's kind of a bummer. And it's interesting to think about in the context of what happened the night before the House Oversight Committee hearing, where they almost pulled the rug out from under Rep. Tim Burchett, who was spearheading this thing for that committee, where they basically said, hey, you're not chairing the committee, and there was a miscommunication, and you're not taking the lead anymore. And I think I commented in our last not our last podcast, but previously, I was pretty pissed about that, and it was kind of worrying to me that it seemed so unprofessional at that time that they were pulling back at the last minute and kneecapping Burchett, and it seemed like he didn't even really know what was going on. So that was concerning. But obviously, the next day, the hearing turned out to be very productive and very revealing, especially when it came to what David Grush had to say, the taxpayer money that's being wasted on these UFO programs. Well, not wasted. I mean, depending on if they're having success, but taxpayer money unaccounted for, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So that was definitely a positive, and that's why I think getting hit with this seeming setback, at least from the House Oversight Committee, who was spearheading this previously, has people feeling pretty down, and that's understandable. But I just wanted to kind of put that into context with everything else before this hearing that came, and obviously, we were pretty stoked on it. There really wasn't any mention of the House Oversight Committee when it came to, the UAP topic in Congress, except for the fact that Tim Burchett was on it, which kind of leads me to believe that Tim Burchett used his position on the House Oversight Committee to get this hearing going. So it wasn't really that the House Oversight Committee wasn't the place for this to happen, because, oversight is their prerogative and it is what they're responsible for. And taxpayer money is definitely, the most important thing to have oversight of. But the problem is, and this is my interpretation of just what I've been hearing and just seeing within the dynamics of, the DOD and Congress, just the way the different committees are treating each other and communicating. It seems like the House Oversight Committee doesn't have either the clearance or the need to know on some of this stuff. A lot of this is DOD and intelligence. So, that would pretty much go to the Armed Services Committees in the House and Senate, and then the intelligence committees in the House and Senate. This is a long-winded way of saying that the House Oversight Committee wasn't really a factor a month ago. And not having it be a factor going forward is, disappointing based on, to me, unexpected success of their hearing. Yeah, it is disappointing, but it's definitely nothing close to catastrophic or setting us back, I don't think. If anything, I think it's just a bummer. But what do you think about it?
I forget who told me this term, but there's a phrase in hospice. Maybe this is a bad time to say it, but they say CTD. I don't think everybody says that, but this phrase CTD is circling the drain. That's how I feel about the people that are trying to conceal this issue right now. Is they are circling the drain right now. Like, it's the end of it. We saw all that UAP hearing. Tell me, how many people did you see lining the hallways before that session?
It's true.
Like, people, if you ask a congressperson, what's the number one concern from letters you get? Many of them will answer the UAP issue, actually, is one of the number one things I get people writing to me about. People care about this topic. And I just feel like these attempts to squander discussion about it is very telling about the individuals involved. This guy, Mike Turner, who has the gall to try to act like this topic is making anybody look bad. He's making himself look bad by trying to stop all these people that care about this topic, all these pilots that have come forward and said, I don't feel like I could have defended myself against this thing. I feel like it's a very bad look for that representative, and he should be ashamed of himself. Because if that many people care about this topic and you think that this is somehow making you look bad, excuse me, Mr. Turner, that headline about you using $70,000 of campaign contributions for you living like a king while the rest of America is struggling, I think that makes you look bad. And quite frankly, I'm not going to stop talking about this. And I'm glad that this podcast is growing because clearly people see through it online, too. The comments I see on your social media are horrendous.
Yeah, dude, it's U.S. politics at its worst. And I think this guy in particular is problematic because he is both the head of the House Intelligence Committee and one of the biggest donation recipients of Lockheed Martin. So that's a pretty toxic combination when it comes to transparency on the UAP issue. You can see why, I guess, Burchett felt the need to push as hard as he did for his own committee. But unfortunately, that is no longer the case because Turner now apparently controls the House Oversight Committee and tells them what to do, which is fucking crazy. I don't get why these people in Congress are just so eager to lay down and do nothing when it comes to their powers. These people should be using their congressional authority to the limit to fight for their constituents and for the American people and to hold the other two branches accountable, especially the DOD, who's been caught wasting taxpayer money on an insane level. I don't get it. Why would you not want scrutiny when it comes to this stuff? I just wanted to say, and your point before where representatives are saying that this issue seems to be, at least, others are most vocal about. I think Jared Moskowitz said that he doesn't hear as much about Hunter Biden or the Trump indictments as he does the UFO issue. It's kind of crazy to think about in terms of, how out of control our news media is with their ratings and just doing everything they can to kind of polarize the country so they can make more money off one side or the other. The fact that Moskowitz is saying that this is what he's hearing about the most, even despite that, is pretty amazing when you think about it. And especially considering the bipartisan cooperation you have on this issue, it shows kind of what America could possibly be when it comes to bipartisanship and finding common ground. When in this time and age where we have that, we don't have that basically. So I wanted to kind of hit on a few things with Mike Turner. I think, Lockheed's his top donor. His district is, the location where Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is. So a lot of Air Force influence there. The other thing is back in, I think, 2015 to 2016, Turner got a massive increase in his net worth, and investments in oil and gas shot up to about 4 million higher. And he went from like 400th wealthiest House representative to top 60 in those 2 years. So something happened there where clearly he owes some favors to the energy industry or some people within there. If they made his political career, he's going to have to pay them back. And, considering UFO technology is probably the number one threat to the status quo of, the petrodollar and just the oil industry in general, and even, green tech, which oil companies have been, getting into and taking grants for and spending more taxpayer money. It's scary for them to kind of see where this is going. I mean, I'm sure they game this out. I'm sure they spend millions of dollars planning out what they would do if some sort of energy breakthrough happened where they could no longer hold us all, under their thumb or whatever. I think, it's pretty scary for them. And the fact that Mike Turner has such an obligation to the oil industry and is at the top of the intelligence committee in the House, has all these donations from Lockheed Martin, and is now telling other House committees how to run their hearings and whether or not they can have UFO hearings because it makes the DOD look bad. I think that's just fucking ridiculous. Like what country does that represent? Not America. Not what the fucking Constitution says is some fucking guy who's corrupt as shit gets to tell every other committee what to do. I don't get it.
Yeah, dude. Mike Turner sounds like a Scooby-Doo bad guy in the UFO world. The description of him, he represents the area of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and he gets big money from Lockheed Martin, and he has a huge loyalty to the oil industry. That is a Scooby-Doo bad guy. It is ridiculous, and he's out there because we have a ridiculous system that's based on the concept of bribery. You bribe the politicians, and you get favor with them. That's how it's been since Citizens United. I think that was in 2012.
Yeah, that's true.
In my opinion, that was a huge failure for our country. I think the Constitution went out the window in a big way once that decision happened. For those who don't know, that's the Supreme Court decision that pretty much said that money is free speech. Now politicians are getting money from all sorts of ways, and it's become extremely difficult since Citizens United to track where these people are getting their money. And we're seeing it in both sides. I know that people are going to be like, oh, this is a Democrat podcast and George Soros told you to say that, bro. Fuck no, he did not. And I wish he'd call and give me a check, but I could honestly give a fuck. Dude, for those who don't know, I'm an independent. I don't know what Klaus is. And quite frankly, I've never asked because I don't give a shit, because I don't care. What we talk about is usually about trying to learn more about the human condition and consciousness and our world and science. And as far as I'm concerned, dude, Mike Turner is an embarrassment right now, because people who do care about those topics have been listening to this podcast and they appreciate it. But yeah, I've constantly, when I hear bullshit and baloney, it's always coming from guys like that who have some sort of foggy connection with some corporation or some contractor. And like, I wish that we could just be transparent. I wish that they would actually be the voice of the people like they're supposed to be in that branch of government and actually represent their area. Yeah, dude, that's kind of my 2 cents on him.
I mean, I guess he is kind of representing his area in the fact that it's the fucking Air Force. But yeah, I mean, yeah, whatever. And I also wanted to kind of like even that out because you're right. It's not, this isn't, I mean, it's political in the sense that we're talking about politicians and, their motives but we're really not going to look at any of this through like a partisan lens because it goes both sides. Like Garrett said, it's, I was researching, the top Lockheed, donor recipients basically in the House, and right up there was this committee, a caucus that was set up in the House that was specifically for supporting the funding of Lockheed's F-35 jet fighter. There were people from both sides of the aisle, and one of them I was disappointed to learn was Andre Carson, who apparently said he's open to this, and it may or may not affect how he acts on this, but I doubt it. But you never know. It depends, I guess, how much he relies on them. But Turner, he is definitely up there, and it doesn't really matter. I mean, just the fact that he happens to represent an area of the country where the Air Force decided to plant their flag. It doesn't have anything to do with politics. It's just how shit worked out. I think his district is actually purple, so I'm sure whoever on the other side, if they took over the seat, would be doing the same shit because it's a game of convenience and outraising your opponent. That's what American politics has turned into, regardless of party. So yeah, just wanted to make sure we were being nonpartisan in our disgust for politics because it goes both ways, and it's tough. It's tough to watch as a taxpayer. It's just like fucking nothing getting done, and that's why this topic it's so fascinating to watch in the political area because it's just so bipartisan, and it's great to see, and it's encouraging, and it does make me proud to be an American. I just think it's a microcosm of what could happen if this was given more attention, and I think it would be very nice to see. That's all I had to say on Turner.
You want to know a weird one? Bipartisan corrupt fun fact?
Yeah.
For those at home curious about how bipartisanly our politics is corrupt, I want everyone to look, but regardless of the administration, of the past 10 to 15 secretaries of the Treasury. And I want you to see or notice how many of them worked for Goldman Sachs. And I want people at home to understand that, like, as they say in horse racing, if you bet on both sides, you're not going to lose. And that's what lobbyists do. Yeah, there are lobbyists in Washington, or there are big companies, I should say, in Washington that pay more for lobbyists than they do in taxes because they want to grease up the politicians. And that is a fact. And that's a horrific fact. But it's how we have billionaire individuals saying that they paid $0 in taxes and being honest about it, because odds are they probably greased up some politician. And yeah. I just the more I talk about this dude, the more I feel like I'm a bit get hit with a fucking IRS audit.
All right, let's avoid that then. And I wanted to say I enjoyed your hospice reference earlier. That was very
Oh, that's dark, bro. I know I don't even remember where I heard that, but it was, dude.
You're good, man. I thought it was great. But no, I mean, that's where it comes from. It's where it comes from. But yeah. All right, let's
You don't have to put that in, bro.
We'll see.
That was dark.
We'll see how it sounds. So yeah, let's get on to something less infuriating, like the recent Washington Post hit piece on David Grush. Like, what the fuck, dude? This thing was not even like close to an article in the first place. It was like someone just like phoned it in, which, you know, maybe lucky for us, you know, in the long run, that they didn't really put much effort into this. But yeah, it was just another. I said it on Twitter that it seemed like a favor. Quote, yeah, no, he's a journalist. The journalist who wrote this article, yeah, basically phoned it in, and it seemed like he was doing his colleague Ken Klippenstein a favor. And I just wanted to acknowledge that I said Klippenstein's name differently. You know, went back and forth in the last episode, and I'm glad I did that because I wanted to disrespect his name. I take that back, kind of, but now he's a complete fucking asshole. So,
dude, I don't know if I told you, but that's one of my debate. That's a subtle debate. I don't know where I learned that from.
What?
I don't know if I learned that from Jesse Ventura, but he said if you're debating someone and you want to bug them, get their name a little bit wrong every time you say their name. And it's a very subtle thing, but dude, if you actually do it, it works so good, especially if the person you're talking to is looking for like a way out of the argument. Yeah. They will be like,
and they'll have to correct you.
They'll be like, I am not Jared.
Yeah. Exactly. So I know I just lie and say that I said that on purpose. I didn't really say it on purpose, but it felt good to listen back to it and just have his name fucked up, you know, one of the two times. So anyways,
dude,
that's the kind of
guy as much as possible.
That's the kind of petty shit that people like Ken Klippenstein or Klippenstein or whatever the fuck his name is. I don't know. Yeah, let's move on to not journalism and not like present day dipshittery within the Congress. So I wanted to talk about mounds, specifically Native American burial mounds. Like I've said before, I like to kind of connect aspects of the quote woo and bring it to something more concrete, like, you know, a scientific paper or a government report. You know, most of these papers that I was looking through on the CIA website and all that, they say Indian. So that's unfortunate. But so I'm going to do my best to, you know, go with Native American. But so a few years ago, when I was researching, you know, Native American burial mounds and just trying to find anything I could that would prove some of this more spiritual or supernatural aspects of these earthen structures and what do they call it?
Well, you picked a good place to start with mounds, because I'll tell you what, dude, as someone who reads about this shit, the Indian mounds are terrifying. Yeah. They are and I'm sure you know more about me, dude, but like from my understanding, roughly, is that all over the country, and all over the planet, really, there are these strange mounds, whether they were for burials or otherwise. But there are these strange mounds, oftentimes in areas with like weird magnetic properties, like ley lines. There's these mounds that have all sorts of like ancient histories to them. And that's all well and good. But something that shocked me is that aerial views of a lot of these mounds show that they resemble like shapes of animals. At least that's my understanding for some of them. But I want to hear what you learned about them, because you studied this, and I know you've written a couple articles about properties of our spots on our planet like that.
So there's one thing that it wasn't like on the CIA website or anything like that. It was just on the, I forget what the website's called. It's the government website where they have all the scientific research papers and documents. And one of them was really interesting, and it's prepared for the Division of Health, Siting, and Waste Management in the Office of Nuclear Regulatory Research for the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So this paper basically outlines a way to store nuclear waste based on the survivability of ancient man-made, basically Native American burial mounds. So, and that's the title of this paper, is called Survivability of Ancient Man-Made Earthen Mounds, Implications for Uranium Mill Tailings Impoundments. And I think uranium mill tailings impoundments is kind of a euphemism for nuclear waste storage. At least that's what I'm getting from that. And if I'm wrong, I'm sorry. But yeah, so essentially they're using the construction methods, or trying to reverse engineer the construction methods of these ancient earthen mounds to store nuclear waste. And I found that pretty interesting, that they are taking ancient technology and trying to reverse engineer it, which, you know, has a lot of parallels with the kind of reverse engineering UFOs. And if UFOs are ancient technology, I mean, it's very, very similar in the timeline and the thought process of doing this. It makes it kind of interesting to think about how humans try to reverse engineer nature and history. There's a lot of examples of that, including I think they just figured out how to, you know, make ancient Roman concrete. I think I saw an article about that a few weeks ago. So
how is that different than regular concrete?
I think it has volcanic ash. I'm not sure.
Oh,
could be
shit.
wrong. There was just something in it that we never thought to use, I guess. So in this paper, they basically make the point that these ancient burial mounds are constructed in a way that would properly and adequately store nuclear waste. They have long-term stabilization, and, you know, can keep this waste from getting into, I guess, the groundwater, basically keeping it insulated from nature. So ancient people had this technology that was apparently strong enough that the government would fund research into emulating that technology. We don't really think, of ancient burial mounds as technology. At least I never did until I read this paper. And it's basically the result of funerary practices, I believe, where they bury their dead in these mounds. They've also, I think, been used for other purposes. But I think the main idea is that they were used for burying their dead. There's a summary of this, so I'll just read parts from it. So they say, this report reviews archaeological data for examples of prehistoric man-made structures to determine if earthen mounds can survive hundreds to thousands of years of weathering and erosion, and if so, to summarize the design and construction practices which promote or detract from their survival. Yeah, they're essentially trying to reverse engineer these ancient mounds. There's some more research into this that they did, specifically in Miamisburg, on those mounds where they built the mound laboratories. It gets really interesting when you start looking into specifically Ohio, the history of that area where they, Wright-Patterson and Mike Turner's district. So why would, the U.S. government build these facilities where people aren't going to be able to excavate any archaeological digs or anything like that, obviously, because there's nuclear waste, everywhere. And they basically, Mound Laboratories turned into a Superfund site. So it's off limits due to, the radiation. You have these ancient structures, like these mounds in the area where they were doing all these, nuclear research, basically. And there's actually a very interesting thing I'm going to read in a little bit that describes kind of how they wanted to shut down excavations in that area.
Yeah, thank you for that description of these mounds that are so bizarre.
You got it.
Because, dude, something about this that my understanding was a little different.
Yeah, go ahead.
As far as burials go, I know that was definitely included in what I understand. But I also understood there to be certain mounds that had ceremonial, for sure, ceremonial traditions that the locals or Apparently there was a ceremonial history to some of these mounds. John Keel, for anyone who's interested in reading about it, in Our Haunted Planet, he talks about how UFOs and MIB appearances and all sorts of spooky things seem to happen in areas of the earth that occultists would call window areas. And window areas seem to be areas of our planet that are usually found where like burial mounds are. And it's really interesting the more you talk about radiation. And radiation is such like a we were talking about DNA in the last episode, and radiation has so much to do with like the mutation rates in our DNA. I just am very intrigued to hear what's written and like what research has been done.
So specifically for the Mound Laboratory, it was completed in 1948, which kind of makes sense. And basically, let me read this. It's an OSTI paper called Brief Historical Background of Miamisburg Indian Mound. And this is pretty much like right down the street from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And it's now today a Superfund cleanup site. So yeah, so it's basically for like it's a reference document. I'm not sure what specifically the agency is, but it does say this report was prepared as an account of work sponsored by an agency of the United States government. You know, one of those disclaimers. So this was a contracted report that the government paid for and that we paid for about Miamisburg and Mound Laboratory. The name Mound Laboratory was chosen for this installation because of the major Indian mound, which is immediately adjacent to the plant site. So they made this report because they say frequent inquiries of visitors to Mound Lab concerning the Indian mounds in general, and specifically Miamisburg's Indian Mound, has indicated an area of outside interest. Outside interest is in quotes. We therefore thought it would be appropriate to furnish this brief historical background to all the attendees at the 20th meeting of the Mechanical Equipment Management Subgroup. So I guess they just wanted to provide people who work there with a little background when people ask about, you know, why did you build this fucking nuclear facility on top of, graves of ancient people. So here's a little background. And basically, this whole report is just pulled from this 1920 article that summarizes like 4 other articles from the 1800s. It's interesting that this is what they gave their employees to have a background so they can talk to people who come visit the lab. So the article basically that makes up this whole memo is called Mammoth Relic of a Vanished Race, in parentheses, interesting account of the Miamisburg Mound made in 1869. Mammoth skeleton, bones, charcoal ashes found, blood-stained altar pavement. No clue to the prehistoric dwellers in the Miami Valley, mystery unsolved. So I just wanted to run through a few of the more peculiar paragraphs of this, because there's a lot in here that I just can't imagine people working at Mound Laboratories telling people about what the fuck I'm about to read. So all this is part of the history of the Miamisburg Mound, Native American burial mound site. A great drought. I don't even know how to pronounce that word. All right.
Drouth?
Yeah.
I see that word. I think that's what that is, but I don't know what the fuck that means.
Anyway, in the valley in the year 1839, and many wells in the vicinity becoming dry, a man named Lewis, residing near the mound, obtained permission of Dr. John Treon and dug into the top of it under the impression that he could find water. But discovering only a few bones at a depth of about 10 or 12 feet from the surface, he became frightened at the hollow sound awakened by his pick and suspended operations. The bones were preserved by Dr. John Treon, the present proprietor of the mound, and are of an enormous size, a jawbone slipping easily over those of the largest man, flesh and all. In this government report, they're basically saying they found a jawbone easily larger than any humans of the present day. Another interesting little nugget is a pioneer relates that whilst plowing in a field adjoining it many years ago, he discovered a grave of extraordinary size, which proved by actual measurement to be not less than 10 feet in length. Here also are found innumerable arrowheads, pipes, hominy pounders, and war axes, artistically fashioned from flint and other hard stones, and so ponderous that none but giant arms could have wielded them. So the fact that this kind of wild shit, basically talking about giants, right? Like, let's just call it what it is in this government document and given to employees of the laboratory built on top of this Native American burial site for them to know about. I just found it really interesting.
We were talking the other day about like Middle and South America, and Volcan Baru, the highest point in, I believe it's like in Panama, which is like right at the cusp of South America, like the very top. And apparently in that area, because we were talking about that Smithsonian guy, Dr. Matthew Sterling. And for those of you who don't know, he was like a real famous, I think he was like an archaeologist, and he was in charge of the expeditions to try to like study the Olmec culture, where you like see those old giant stone heads that have like helmets on and stuff. Well, that guy did like a whole series excavations and like expeditions. I might be getting this wrong, but he was like the head of human ethnology for the Smithsonian Institute for a very long time. He had a very famous expedition of the Olmec civilization, and at the very top of South America, like I was saying, that area around Volcan Baru, that area apparently had all sorts of the traits that you just listed. They had a history of human sacrifice. They had a bunch of like weird stories of bizarre things happening around that mountaintop. And it just sounded like Keel's description of window areas. And then even if you flip it to the other side of the planet, you have all the myths about Mount Hermon. What is the Gilgamesh myth is the Babylonians, right? Gilgamesh and Enkidu fight this creature called Humbaba. And Humbaba, when they fight Humbaba, that takes place on Mount Hermon. For the Book of Enoch people, the fall of the Watchers takes place at Mount Hermon. Even in the Bible, Jesus like performs an exorcism at the base of Mount Hermon in this area. I think it's called Caesarea Philippi. I'm probably butchering that. But yeah, there's all sorts of strange properties. And for those of you who don't know, Mount Hermon is the highest point in Syria. And it's a very large mountain range. So like the more stories I hear about mountains and mountaintops and properties of mounds, it definitely is really intriguing. This though, you said they're handing this to employees of these places and they're telling the guests who visit.
Yeah, they're like, here's some background on the place we just fucking built nuclear. Yeah. So, and I kind of wanted to finish this up actually. And so they end it with another article, this one from August 6th, 1869. And they say, with the rude instruments which we have reason to believe this people only possessed, the construction of the mound must have been a gigantic work, likely only to have been undertaken by a race great in stature and number. Even in this day, the completion of such a structure would by no means be considered light and insignificant, and it is but reasonable to suppose that a work so vast and substantial could only have been devised and accomplished for some purpose or design expressive of a prominent national trait, belief, or tradition of the mound builders.
What's the phrase? Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And that's how I feel about the Giants thing, is like, I love reading about the myths. I know the Greek myths has giants, and we mentioned a couple before, but like, it's just interesting to me, the hard confirmation of them. As far as I look at like those myths and stuff, I feel like it was the people of the times attempt at trying to describe something, but I don't know if that necessarily means that there was some giant 12-foot species. You know what I'm saying? I feel like maybe it was some primitive way of talking about a topic that like was really difficult to describe because regardless of the culture that talks about giants, the stories are always very strange. Like they're talk about people like coming from the sky, or they talk about people that are only seen in certain times of the day. Like they're very bizarre, and don't exactly fit my idea of like an everyday animal, you know? So that's just one little caveat to those giant myths, is like a lot of the time the giant myths have like other magical qualities to them that I feel like may be more metaphorical than literal. But even still, I don't think that it means that they're all nonsense. It may be something that is like really beautiful or poetic. I just feel like the point kind of sails over my head the more I hear about these stories about UFOs in the areas, or people having poltergeist activities in these areas where mounds are. Is like those types of things make it go into like strange territory, whereas other times I get mystified by it.
So, like, what if these were giants? You know, what would that mean to you if, like, they were like, yeah, we found like a fucking 12-foot dude crammed into this fucking mound? Like, would that prove anything? Would it verify some sort of biblical story, or would it prove some sort of myth correct? I mean, because that's different. Like finding species that is clearly not what humans look like today. That's a bit different than finding, say, Troy or Babylon, or some myth that was eventually proven correct as a location, rather than, you know, a whole species. Which kind of seems weird that, you know, when you think about it, we're only finding these locations and we're building fucking, you know, nuclear facilities on top of. I guess my question is like, what would it prove to you if they dug up something?
I wanted to just kind of point out, like, if you found Shaquille O'Neal's skeleton and it was also next to a 1-year-old infant skeleton, there, I'm sure, thousands and thousands of years from now, are individuals that might think one is a different species than the other. I don't think that necessarily for sure, but I was just trying to make that analogy for like things like this. Is like gigantism isn't exactly like the most foreign thing to us.
Right.
I feel like even if they did find something like that, it would be a very big reach to say it's confirming certain myths to be true. I think it would be more than likely that it would teach us more about, or it would get us conversing more about gigantism. And I know that even in biology, there's a principle called island gigantism, where like if one animal is removed from the rest of its group and it's placed in an island, there are examples where, like the Galapagos tortoises, the common ancestor of all the Galapagos tortoises. For those of you who don't know, those are like a giant species of tortoise. And apparently those Galapagos tortoise common ancestor is much smaller than they are. But for this phenomenon known as island gigantism, it makes it to where the offspring of this ancestor grow to be like very, very large size. And it happens with not just tortoises. There's other species where you can find examples of that. But like, I feel like the explanation we would get offered would fall more along those lines. Let's say they found like King Gilgamesh. You know what I'm saying? Like if they did something like that, that would be shattering if they could like find some sort of like confirmation. But as far as them finding a giant skeleton or something like that, I think that would probably be pretty prosaically explained. But I do think that opportunists would jump on that and try to say that like it confirms their particular myth or story. I don't know. That's just I have a very pessimistic view of when large things like that are revealed. I just think that snake oil artists are going to just try to trick people into giving them a bunch of money to talk about it. But yeah, that's kind of how I feel about stuff like that. Is like if they discovered that, I would just have to see where the evidence suggests.
I was going to ask you, like, what if they found, 200 giants jammed into a mountain. But what would that make a difference if it was like a whole, fucking thing? But yeah, I get what you're saying. The island gigantism thing definitely kind of addressed that.
When people are talking about giants or speculating about giants, one of the weirdest things about history is the Sumerians, because the Sumerians just like appeared, like civilization just appeared. And it seemed like they had the entire solar system figured out. And this is before, like, correct me if I'm wrong, this is before the Romans and the Greeks and like a lot of these traditions that came afterwards. The Sumerians were like the first civilization. And they believed that human beings were slaves to lazy giant gods. That was the among the first religious beliefs, is that human beings were created as slaves to serve the lazy gods. They, in all their little pictures, you see like giant entities like sitting in chairs and a bunch of little humans dressed very plainly or not dressed at all, like the stick figures. They would all just be like gathered around, like cheering for it or like bowing to it. I mean, that's what I would think. If one of those cultures found a giant, I guarantee they would be bugging, because they would be like, "Oh my God, this is our God." Or but like, I don't know what those stories indicate. The ancient aliens people are like, "Oh, well, they were just extraterrestrials." But like, I don't know if it's that simple. I feel like maybe it's something, like I said earlier, more metaphorical. But the Sumerians, definitely, their myths describe human beings being created by the gods, by these giant things, in the image of them, to serve the lazy gods. And I think it's an interesting starting point, if that's where like civilization just comes online, and that's what the first beliefs that people have is or are.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's a weird ass starting point.
That's that. Like, yeah, and God damn it. Did you see Ross Coulthardt's recent speech on Close Encounters Australia, I believe?
No, I don't think so.
You got to check that out. I'm gonna do a spoiler alert and try not to shit yourself, because this is crazy.
Oh God.
Sorry. So Ross gave a speech where he basically said that his sources are telling him. The interesting part is he prefaced this with the interdimensional theory. He kind of advocated for that in a way. And then he actually went on to talk about secret machines. His sources are telling him that human origins are basically, our origin is because of this non-human intelligence. He like, his intelligence sources are telling him that we were created by whatever this intelligence is that we're seeing in our skies. And pretty much, yeah, pretty fucking heavy shit.
I don't know. I mean, I don't want to act like that's not awesome that he said that, but the shit you and I talk about, dude, this is like run of the mill, dude. Like, this is commonplace. We've heard some really impressive individuals make some really impressive claims. So I'm glad Ross said that, and I hope that those things get looked into. I don't think people need the intelligence agencies or anyone to tell them these things. It's like, it's so crazy to me that people are waiting to get confirmation from X organization or Y group. And like,
yeah,
at the end of the day, look at the evidence. Look at what these stories are telling us. Look at what people have said about them. Like, and then look at what the evidence suggests right now scientifically. Is like, it's still spectacular. It's very difficult for me because I'm not religious. Like, I'm as much as I bring up these stories and myths and stuff, I just like to learn the stories and the myths. I don't take them literally to be true. The fact that the Sumerians believe that, and that's like one of the first civilizations, and that was like their starting point. I think that's a weird ass starting point to start worshiping. Ever since then, all of these religions have like It's not always positive, especially as we were talking about Mounds, talking about like Mesoamerica and stuff. And like things got dark religiously for a long time. But a lot of them were like, the gods are mad at us. And like they were trying to explain all the horrible things that happened, and they would blame it on the gods, or good stuff that would happen. They would blame it on the gods. Throughout human history, you can see that like human beings have a history of when stuff goes crazy or people get really stressed out or a cataclysm happens, they'll blame a group.
The blaming of the other is a very human reflex or instinct.
Sure.
To be fearful of something you are not familiar with is very human. Conflict is pretty easy to instigate among, different tribal groups when it comes to human nature. And I think if the phenomenon or, small g gods or whatever beings these might be wanted to nudge humanity in a certain way, they could incite conflict pretty easily and get us to do things that would change our trajectory culturally. And, like I've said before, culture can affect your evolution.
Even in the Sumerians, they got Marduk and Tiamat, and the battle between Marduk and Tiamat. And they said that Tiamat was like this ancient dragon god, and the human beings were born like from the blood of Tiamat and the breath of Marduk. And apparently that like some humans, they would say, lean to be more like Tiamat, and other humans lean to be more like Marduk. And even that is a interesting example of like those early civilizations trying to like put their finger on this idea of like that human beings have this internal like reflective conflict within them of like where they come from.
Just the human tendency towards binary thinking and good or bad. Is it a way? And then there's like kind of in between. The way I think of it is like there's good and bad in terms of human frame of reference. And then in between are emotions, like basically where you're at between those two. We only see things as one of two things. It's either black tech or it's extraterrestrials from another planet, when it could be like a million different things, multiple things. I think that is a real hindrance on our ability to think outside the box. And just generally when it comes to interacting with other humans, there's a lot of nuance that gets lost because of our tendency to react to something that we're not familiar with.
When they talk about our brains, and they I hate using this term because it makes you sound like David Icke, but they use the term reptilian brain for like this part of our brain that is responsible for like instinctive function and like self-serving function, I should say. And I forget who said it. I think it was Barack Obama. He came on a show and he was talking about how human beings have this part of our brain that anything that's a little different or anything that's other, we have to like consciously make an effort to like be good. I feel like I'm butchering his quote, but he says that it's something that like human beings, we're understanding more about ourselves and the ways our brain functions, and that we it seems like certain human beings have a very hard time with the other. I don't know. I don't want to say, is it an instinctual urge to like not like the other? Or
no, it's probably why we're here. It's probably why we have, basically taken over the world and fucking reproduced exponentially. It's just part of who we are. And that was the thing I was kind of talking about with Homo naledi, is like, were we always that way? Or were we more altruistic, I guess, like able to live among the other, like different hominin species? What happened along the way where we just started, being the only ones left? Like what caused that? Was it instigated? that's kind of where my brain goes. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just,
Right.
it's a speculation that I find to be worth considering. I just wanted to touch on the second fiction Secret Machines book, A Fire Within. They open up the book. Chapter 1 is basically, it's in Sumeria in Iraq, and the date is 3216 BCE. And it basically tells the story of this village in Sumeria seeing a craft and them considering the craft a goddess. It basically plays out this whole scenario we've been talking about, where some sort of paranormal phenomena shows up, and it's the gods or whatever. In this little story specifically, it's like one of those side stories they open the book with. This guy, I guess the craft kind of goes off into the distance, and this boy's friend runs after it, and the boy follows him. And essentially, there's symbols on the ground, and basically the boy's friend like learned how to write. So essentially, what they're trying to communicate in this first chapter of this second book is, we were gifted language. It's an idea. Tom made these fiction books to get your mind kind of going. But considering other things he's talked about, I think he thinks there's something to this, and language is something that has completely shaped humanity as we've gone on. I made a point in one of my previous articles that language itself might be some kind of control system, where we lock in our history as a written record of exactly what happened. And if these things show up and do things that aren't within the human capability to do, and we write that down in our interpretation of it during that time, that's going to last for millennia. Those stories, as they were written at that time. I mean, yeah, there'll be different editions published, and people will, alter them for their own benefit and create, different, splinter religions where they, it's all the same thing, but it just kind of benefits them in a very selfish way. Yeah, written history, that's all we have to base stuff off of is this record of things that happened at that point in time that probably keeps us on a specific track as we go through our evolution and cultural changes throughout history. They're based on things that we read over generations, and I guess it's interesting to think about that written history in comparison to, say, Native American history that was just passed down orally from generation to generation.
Look at the Yazidi in the Middle East. Is the Yazidi have been, I think the Yazidi have been the victims of more genocides than any religion ever. Like the Yazidi, they consider themselves in that region, like you said, I think you were talking about Iraq and that it's Sumeria, is like, yeah, that ancient area or region known as Sumer. And in John Keel's, like one of his first books, Jadoo, he writes about how he got to watch in on a Yazidi ceremony. And he said it was the scariest shit he'd ever seen in his life. And they were going to kill him for like speaking out of turn or something. And like, definitely worth reading that book because it goes into all sorts of like ancient belief systems. But the Yazidi, for a long time, people didn't even think they existed anymore until like Barack Obama came on TV and said that the United States was rescuing or giving like air support to a group of Yazidi that was under attack by like terrorists or something. That particular group of people has really struggled for a long time at preserving their oral culture. And it's just very fascinating that like they stick out like a sore thumb in an area that is usually very like aggressively a lot of religious theocracies going on in that area. And it's not very easy to hold in other quote unquote belief system when you live in those areas.
Yeah, no, I mean it's human nature in general. It's power.
Yeah.
Anyone in a position of power probably made some compromises to get there that others wouldn't have for whatever reason.
Well, that was something with old kings, is
Yeah.
they would say they ruled through God. Like even the pharaohs there's many examples of cultures where whoever's in charge says that they're in charge by some divine right. And almost in every example, it ends up being baloney for the people that are living there. It's horrible. Like across cultures, it's horrible. And it's always kings and queens or whoever that say they have special permission from God to mistreat people. And that's why I'm always hesitant to try to jump into any belief system, because like I know human beings have a history of getting it dead wrong on that type of stuff,
Yeah. And that's what makes it so dangerous in like the UFO issue, is that this cover up is real. And that's part of the reason it's so dangerous, is because the government has literally covered up, and they continue to this day. And it's obvious, and it's getting even more obvious every time they try to discredit someone or withhold information from Congress. And it's just, there's something there. There's a there, and that's going to make people, like you say all the time, fill the cracks with conspiracy theories and cause distrust in our institutions. And it's just snowballs to the point where we have a insurrection, and we're not going to, I'm just saying that's an example of something that didn't need to happen, but like a narrative was fed, and it ended up in a lot of people being tricked into doing something stupid. And
oh, you talking about all those dummies that were in Dallas waiting under a bridge for John F. Kennedy's son to come? Like, I don't know if you are hesitant to insult those people, but I'm pretty much like, I don't care about those people's feelings, dude. And all those people that believed this bozo that go ahead, but I don't feel sympathy for those people at all, that they got duped. I do feel bad for the fact that they got duped, but at the same time, dude, we gotta, as human beings, like if you have a member of your family that was actually believing that bozo, like you need to talk to them, and you need to show them books that like actually show history and actually show that like there are good people out there, and they don't have to be. I don't know. I feel like I'm getting preachy now, but that type of stuff always bugs me, man. That conspiracy got way too out of control.
Well, that's the other edge of the sword when it comes to the internet and the democratization of information, is that people can exploit it for their own gain, and in ways that they could never have done before, and it lose role as kind of counterintelligence when it comes to the UFO issue. If you wanted to release information that would give people an opportunity to start indoctrinating others into a cult, and basically brainwash people into believing your narrative of whatever, in this case, it's technology, let's say. You would kind of pick someone who was good at counterintelligence to prevent that from happening. I've kind of always seen Lou's role in this whole thing as like trying to prevent cults from forming. So when it comes to someone like, say, Greer, right, who has been doing this a long time and is very charismatic and has connections and has a history of reinforcing beliefs, and he's been doing this forever. Say someone like him was at the top and all this stuff came out, he would be first in line to start scooping people up. If he had his way, he would take everyone he possibly could under his tent and teach them C5 and have them buy his app. Like he's proven that is his MO. It would make sense in order to prevent that kind of exploitation of, people who are easily persuaded, or not gullible, but like eager to believe. it would make sense to kind of deploy someone with kind of counterintelligence skills to prevent, some sort of massive Heaven's Gate type thing from happening. But I'm not saying that's what Lou's doing. I'm not saying I have any information that says that. It just, if I was going to try to get information out that, may include the technology of the gods or whatever, something supernatural to us in our current paradigm, I would definitely want someone to prevent others from exploiting that. It ties into the whole kind of ufology needs to die thing, where these cults of personality have been spinning the narrative in whatever makes them money. I think, it needs a fresh start. It needs academic investigation. And I think people need to keep an open mind and not gravitate towards one belief or the other until the evidence proves out to show that that's a legitimate thing to do at the right time.
I saw when Luis Elizondo went on Kurt Jaimungal's show, one of the times, he said it outright of how these groups can be super dangerous. And he pointed out, look at Heaven's Gate. All sorts, like we said, like all sorts of splinter groups can develop because of weird, bizarre groups like this. And like there's a ton of internal strife, it seems like. And I find it so strange that when Greer talks about Elizondo, he seems like he hates him. He talks about him as if he's like some secret agent tasked with deceiving the American public.
Well, he's fucking up his whole thing.
Yeah, he completely shines a light on who this guy is, Yep. And I thought that anyone who hasn't seen that interview with Kurt, definitely check that out, because he lays it out and says, like, be cautious before you join some group, and like look at the history of groups like this and how they've been used to manipulate people. And I thought Lou earned a lot of my trust after hearing that, because I've never heard Lou told me to join some group or to subscribe to his like fucking like never anything, dude. He's just says what he says. And my God, man, people will go out of their way to make it seem like this guy is on like a Lady Gaga world tour and that he is like fleecing everybody. And it's so false, dude. I think there's enough people fleecing people. Actually, something I wanted to say about Greer, the first time that I saw Stephen Greer, it was someone had sent me a link to something, and it was Alex Jones interviewing him. It was a dumb person that sent me this, but it was Alex Jones interviewing him. And I'm like, what the fuck? And I'm looking at all of these like links that are on the sidebar of the screen. And it was all of these like just charlatans. Like it was David Icke. I think Pat Robertson was. I was like, what the hell does Pat Robertson have to do with David Icke? And it was all in like the same little network schism. And I saw very early on that like there are people out there that are faking the funk, and like that is one of them. That the track record is not good. And I think that's a good interview when Kurt is talking to Elizondo. If you want to check out Elizondo talking about this, what we're discussing right now. But yeah, that's where I first noticed that like something was rotten in the fridge as far as like the information goes, and like how people get it.
Fucking Pat Robertson and David Icke. Oh my God.
So what are you guys doing in here?
I wanted to talk about consciousness.
Yeah, right. They don't.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. It was a fun chat, man. It's always awesome to just sit down and fucking look at shit and fucking shoot the shit about it. So I think it's really a unique thing that we are doing. I mean, I don't really see people just two lay people just talking about this stuff. It's usually somewhat formal, and that's awesome, and we'll try to do that eventually, at least for some of these. But it's really good just to go over some of this stuff, and it makes you think about things you wouldn't have thought about if you hadn't done it. So I always appreciate that.
Yeah, dude, this was a good conversation. I'm excited.
Sweet, dude. Yeah, so I guess I should ask people to like and subscribe to the podcast. I think it gets you more visibility or something like that. And yeah, share it with friends and family if you're if you got the courage to do so. Yeah, there's a lot going on in this one, but yeah, I just wanted to express my appreciation.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
So yeah, thanks for coming in, and we'll talk to you next week. All right, bye.